Since it's just you and I up here and you're going to be over there, I'm going to take this off so I can breathe and see here.
Good evening and welcome, both those that are here and those that are at home. Welcome to our trip to the Holy Land, and this is part of our Lenten journey, Places of Passion. You should have been getting a weekly email with a weekly message. We have visited Jerusalem, Bethany, Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane. This week is the High Priest's Courtyard, and then the 21st will be Pilate's Judgment Hall. And then Holy Week, we have a few different things going on. I found through Notre Dame University, they actually had a trip to the Holy Land with their alumni association, and they have a daily little 5-minute video showing places that they went, and then the people talking about their reactions to things and their thoughts at the various places. So every day, starting Palm Sunday through Easter, you'll get an email with that link for the visit to the Holy Land. And then on Maundy, Thursday, there'll be a virtual Maundy, Thursday service with communion. On Good Friday, traditionally, is the Troy community service, which is not happening this year. The United Methodist Conference for Michigan has created a Good Friday service, which we will be sharing with you for that. And then, of course, Easter will be 10 a.m. here as well as on our YouTube channel. So I hope you have been enjoying. If you have not been getting the emails, please contact the office and we'll make sure you get those. And make sure that you're on the list. Sometimes names pop off for whatever reason. We don't know why. So please let us know. If you don't have the devotional but would like to get one, there's some by the door. If you're at home and would like a devotional, call the office. We'll mail them to you. They're very short, couple-minute readings, so it's easy to catch up to where we are. So with no further ado, I would like to welcome Nancy, Cormier, and Jim, who's upstairs, for the trip to the Holy Land. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky, and those of you that are here. Jim and I did go with a group to Israel back in January of 2018. It was sponsored by Educational Opportunities and led by Terry and Steve Uper. We traveled from Detroit to Tel Aviv via Newark, New Jersey on an overnight plane ride. We toured from January 10th through January 15th. We spent 3 nights in Bethlehem and 2 nights in Jerusalem. There were 25 of us on this tour from several different locations and states. Our tour guide was a Palestinian Christian who had a wealth of knowledge of the history of the area. We were up every day at 6:30 a.m. on the bus at 8 o'clock in the morning. As you'll notice in the pictures, it starts off pretty cool, so we're all dressed nice and warm, and then it gets warm as the afternoon gets on, and then it gets cool again when the sun goes down. Before each tour, our group would gather, and our tour guide would explain the traditional beliefs of that site. As a group, we would read scripture that pertained to that site. So, on our first day, the bus took us from the airport to the city of Jaffa.
On our bus ride from the airport to Jaffa, I took a couple of pictures out the side of buildings. These are homes of the people. And on the roof, you can see these black objects and these cylinders, white cylinders. Those are solar panels and water tanks. That is how they heat their water. Okay.
So we went to the city of Jaffa, and you'll see the cobblestone streets and the old part of town are very narrow. We were shown the house of Simon the tanner. You can see that brown door up there, or window, where Peter stayed when he went to Joppa or Jaffa. From Acts, it says, "Send therefore to Joppa and ask for Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying in the home of Simon, a tanner by the sea." That was in Acts 10:32. Jews did not associate with tanners, as they worked with dead animals. But after Jesus' death and resurrection, Peter changed the views towards this Jewish law. You can see how narrow the streets are, or were. Our hotel, the first 3 nights, as I said, was in Bethlehem. And we had to pass through Israeli checkpoints when we entered or when we left.
They're very serious about security over the Jewish sites, and they do not allow free flow of traffic through. You have to have proper credentials. Other than that, you're free to roam once you're inside a Jewish-held territory.
This is up, we went up a hill, and this is still in Jaffa, and this is the Mediterranean Sea that they overlooked. And that's Tel Aviv way off in the distance. This is on top of that hill at Jaffa. This is our first night, our dinner.
Our meals were, you might want to call it a Mediterranean diet. Lots of salads, fruit, vegetables. They did have meats. In some cases, the meats were not to my liking. I'm not a liver and heart type person. But they were very good meals prepared. And as a group, our 25 of us, we normally ate together all of our meals.
Okay, now we're going to day 2. We went to the Herodian, which was one of King Herod's summer palaces, south of Jerusalem, overlooking the wilderness. And the Herodian is being reconstructed.
Right. This is a model inside the guest building to show you what the Herodian looked like a short period past. And what they're reconstructing, and much of it is, as you see here, is not done. Most of it's just covered in sand and sandstone. We had to walk up a trail that wound around the mountain, the Herodian, and it was strenuous for a number of us. At the top, they had a model here that shows what the top of the Herodian would have looked like in its day. You're looking down the side, going into the valley, looking towards Jerusalem, and you can see that the land is very stark. It's basically, I would call it like a desert. In the Bible, it's called a wilderness. Not much of anything grows. It's basically sandstone, sand, and rock. This is the top as it is now, or it was in 2018 when we visited. And you can see that they're under construction or reconstruction. And this was our contingent that were all members of Big Beaver United Methodist Church at one time. From left to right, you have myself and Nancy. Then you have Steve Uper, Susan and Tom Clippert, and Reverend Terry Uper. You can see some construction workers, and we only saw maybe 4 or 5 the whole time we were there. And that's because in order to work on a reconstruction, you have to be licensed. And the fact that they don't have a lot of money to pay for people to do it, the work is very slow. It takes years to develop a site. This is some of the sculpturing that they did on the columns and walls. Very detailed, and you can imagine how much effort it took and years to do this. The picture here is of the reception hall as it would have looked like. This picture is what it looked like when we were there. Our tour guide is facing us here in the picture, and you can see he's holding something in his hand. He had a little microphone, then he had a little pack about the size of a cigarette, and he was transmitting, and each of us in the tour had a little receiver about the size of a cigarette pack and an earphone, so we could be quite a ways away from him and hear everything he had to say about the site. So you could be taking pictures of one thing and listening to him talk about something else. And he was extremely knowledgeable. This is looking down into the ritual bath. After we spent a number of hour or so up on top looking around at everything and what they're reconstructing, then we walked out. Instead of going down the hill, we walked up around. We went down through the caves, and these are all sandstone caves. And there were cisterns down here where they used to hold the water that the people would use for drinking and bathing. We're looking at a picture about the Royal Theater, as it probably looked like back in Jesus' day. Here's what it looks like now looking down. You can see it's quite eroded, but they are in the process of reconstructing this as well.
Okay, from here we went to Shepherd's Field. This is where the angels announced to the shepherds the birth of Jesus, and there's a chapel here. We normally think of the shepherds and the sheep being out in an open field at the time of the Annunciation. However, the tradition was that at night the sheep would come into a cave while the shepherds would sleep at the mouth of the cave. These are pictures inside that chapel.
Okay, what you see here is a picture of the gate or the doorway into the cave. Most of the wall is filled in with blocks that they've done after the fact to keep the cave from caving in. We were able to go inside, and it's actually set up. You could actually have church services there. We did sit and read scripture and prayed. But the cave was interesting in that the sheep would be in the cave, and the shepherds would be at the opening of the cave to make sure they were safe, and that's where they would sleep at night.
Now, the Church of the Nativity is over the traditional birthplace of Christ. The original church was built by Emperor Constantine around 300 AD. It has been rebuilt over the years, and several religious denominations are working on the reconstruction.
Yes. Inside the church, it's very ornate. What you're looking at here is like an altar with decorations all around. And the next picture here will show you much closer. When you're looking down in, you see this metal artwork. And then you look a little further, and there's like a portal looking down through the floor. It's under the, what do you call it?
The altar?
The altar, sorry. It's under the altar, and in order to look down at the birthplace, or in other churches, whatever they were trying to show you underneath, you had to get down on your knees to look down, which made you basically worship God. You're prostrating yourself in front of God rather than standing up. So you had to get down and almost crawl underneath the altar. The floor in this church is being redone and brought back to life. And you can see around this the wood that's to protect the rest of the floor. And what's open is either for viewing or for them to work on in the restoration process. The pillars are also being reconstructed or brought back to their former glory. And this picture here shows a lady who is painlessly taking, or very painfully taking, a paintbrushes and redoing the painting on this to bring it back to its original.
Jim and I that night and another couple had dinner at the home of a Palestinian Christian family. The adult son picked us up at our hotel and drove us to his home that he shared with his parents. We enjoyed talking to them and learning about their living situation. Their home, as most others, was not heated, but they had a large portable space heater that they moved from room to room. The adult son told us he worked as a loan officer in a bank in Jerusalem and earned $500 a month. He also talked about the difficulties the Palestinians have with their ability to move freely in Israel. He has been unable or was unable to get a visa to come to the United States, although his mother and sister have been able to do so. He said being a Palestinian male, he has been denied repeatedly. Now this is the next day, day 3.
What you're seeing here is pictures I've taken from the bus showing a modern city, and you can see there's a wall around it, which tells you it's a Jewish city. And they would have entry points or gates that you could go in by, but of course you had to have the proper credentials. And you can see the land, how barren it looks and dry. Again, a little more of the landscape as we were driving.
All right, we went up to the northern part of Israel, which is to Jericho, which is the oldest city in the world, they advertise. Jericho is in the Palestinian territories, but under Israeli control. Here, we came, after our lunch, we came out, and this man had his camel, and he was giving camel rides. I elected just to feed the camel. Nope, Jim didn't ride either. We are up here at the top of the hill. You climbed up a hill, and this overlooks Jericho. And notice how green everything is here, as opposed to the limestone ground cover that we saw in Bethlehem and in Jerusalem. This is the land of milk and honey that God promised the Israelites when they left Egypt.
Okay. I guess I'm a little lost here, dear.
Bottom of page 2.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, we visited the baptismal site on the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized by his cousin John the Baptist. 2 of our group went into the river to be baptized, while the rest of us were sprinkled with water. On the other side, if you'll notice that the water's quite muddy, the other side of the river is Lebanon, and they had armed guards who were patrolling up and down the shore. The gentleman dressed in white, there was a gentleman and a lady dressed in white. They're the ones that went in and got baptized in the river. Now we're in Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered back in 1952. We also saw the site of the Essenes, which was a sect of the 2nd century BC and the 1st century to the 1st century AD. They wrote on papyrus and parchment 900 documents from the Hebrew Bible.
You can see in this picture a facsimile of how they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were in jars that were sealed to protect them, and they did its job because we were able to read those scrolls 2,000 years after they were made. What you see here is the caves in which the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. tradition says that a boy who was tending his sheep, trying to find one of his lost sheep, came across these caves and thought maybe his sheep had fallen in, so he threw some stones down to see if he could make the sheep make some noise or whatever, and he heard a clinking noise, so he went down to investigate and found the scrolls. You can see the whoops, gotta go back one, sorry.
This is part of where the Essenes sect was,
Right.
part of their community, that they're being, there's a dig there. And that's one of the ritual baths.
Another view of the bath there.
Okay, this is the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is the lowest body of water on the earth. It's 33% salt. Most ocean salt water is 3% salt.
Yeah, the Dead Sea is, as Nancy said, is shrinking, and if nothing's done in about 50 years, you won't have a Dead Sea. It'll just be a big dry body of land. The Israelis are attempting to build a pipeline over to the Dead Sea to bring water in it from the Mediterranean, which would offset the water that's being taken for commercial use and that which is being evaporated every day. We're looking down at the beach they have for guests and people like us when we're there visiting. It's a quite modern facility they've built there. You can see here the mud, and if you look sort of off to the right top of the picture here, how far back the mud and beach area goes. And that's, you can see the water used to be all the way up to the hillside there.
Yes, as he said, that the Dead Sea is shrinking due to the Jordan River, which flows into the Dead Sea, being diverted and used for commercial purposes. It's been estimated that the Dead Sea will disappear in about 50 years. And you can see the salt crystals, those are on the shore. And there's some stores in town that talk about how using the mud from the Dead Sea is used for cosmetic purposes. Okay, day 4, we've gone up to the Galilean area in northern Israel of Tabgha, where the feeding of the multitudes took place. This is the Church of the Beatitudes. It's very beautiful up there. Again, it's green.
Most of the churches that we visited were built over what tradition says was the site that this particular thing's happened. This supposedly is built over the site that the Beatitudes, that Jesus gave his sermon, the Beatitudes. So it's a modern church, or fairly modern church, but it's right over what would have been 2,000 years ago, a hillside that Jesus would have been sitting on preaching to the people.
Capernaum was the center of Jesus' ministry. The Capernaum Synagogue is estimated to have been built in the 3rd century AD on the same site as the 1st century synagogue. After Jesus was rejected in Capernaum for healing on the Sabbath, he often taught on the hillsides near the Sea of Galilee. It was in Capernaum that Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Interesting how they spell it differently than the way we spell Capernaum. This was a picture of the synagogue.
This is the synagogue in Capernaum.
So from here, we had an appointment to go on a boat on the Sea of Galilee. So we left where we were did the Sea of Galilee, then we came back later. But right now we're going to go to the Sea of Galilee.
This is a billboard showing you which way to go, but it depicts a picture of one of the fishing boats that was, at the time of Jesus, would have been there and used. They were open at top, unlike some of the pictures we have of some actual boats that are there. About the same size, but in Jesus' day they did not have the canopies over the boats. We did take this boat ride on the Queen of Sheba. While we were there, it had a big open deck, and they taught us some traditional Jewish songs, showed us a little bit of dance, and then showed us how the fishermen would use their nets to get fish. Unfortunately, the nets that they threw that day came back with nothing in it.
Empty.
Here's a little picture that was on the back of the crew's shirts showing the Sea of Galilee, and you can see up towards the top
Towards the
left,
top.
Capernaum.
And looking across the Sea of Galilee from Capernaum, this is the Golan Heights. And now we're back to the Beatitude, the Church of the Beatitudes.
Right. You can see how beautiful the grounds were. As you look towards the altar, you can see in front of the altar the diagrams of the fish and bread and the basket depicting the feeding of the multitudes.
The Church of the Primacy of St. Peter marks the spot where Jesus made Peter his chief apostle. Upon this rock I will build my church. According to tradition, this rock that was on the table which Jesus ate with his disciples after the resurrection. Mensa Christi means table of Christ. This is a sculpture of Jesus and Peter. This is a Church of the Primacy that they built over the site where they said, tradition says that Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. So they are digging down. They're saying this was built over that site.
This is kind of peeking underneath the church to see the reconstruction area that they're doing. In the church itself, they sit all around. In the center area is the actual glass opening showing the construction site right directly below you. So if you're there when workers are working, you can see exactly what they're doing.
This is a sculpture of Peter. And we went into town and we had lunch of tilapia, also known as Peter's fish.
Right. On our drive, wanted to show you here a couple pictures of looking at the old city of Jerusalem, how it was built up on the mountain, basically, and you can see layers of rock and stone here. And then the walls of the city actually built on top of that. Another picture from a different view of the city. And this is where, or one of the gates to the city. And this is part of our group that are walking up to go to the wall. Or actually, we're going to the Weeping Wall here, but we're going to show you some pictures of Gethsemane next.
Okay, now we're at the foot of the Mount of Olives, is the Garden of Gethsemane. We saw olive trees, some which may have been there, trees that Jesus saw.
Right.
This is the Garden of Gethsemane.
This tree here is about 54 years old, and you can see it's not very big. The next tree here is believed to be about 2,000 or more years old, and probably was in the garden at the time of Jesus.
Now, tradition says that this is the rock where Jesus prayed on the night before his crucifixion. This is inside a church. And they have all around the church the depiction of Jesus. If it's big enough that you can see, but they have Jesus sitting on that rock. His arrest.
Here's our tour group, all 25 of us, including our tour guide to the far right. And you can, if you know the people from Troy back a few years, you'll recognize about 5 faces there. We're looking across the Kidron Valley, and the golden dome you see there is the Dome of the Rock. It's within the city walls. So if you look just barely over our heads, you can see the wall of the old city wall. And between us and them is a cemetery, a Muslim cemetery. It's very large, and they built it there to keep the Jews from going in that area to pray. You can see one of the gates that have been sealed. There were 8 primary gates and then a few lesser gates. Right now, 7 of the primary gates are open to go through.
Jesus and his disciples often walked from the Garden of Gethsemane to Jerusalem on these steps. They go from the lower part of the city to the higher grounds where the rich people lived, such as the high priest Caiaphas.
And of course, our story is from the upper room, which you can see here. This is a recreation of what they think the upper room would have looked like. They actually, as you know, on that Passover, they walked from the upper room to the garden. So they would have crossed those steps that we were looking at.
There's a church of St. Peter of Gallicanto, and it's over the home of the high priest Caiaphas. You can see in this picture the cock on the top. That represents the cock that's crowed 3 times, where Peter denied Christ 3 times. On that night that Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was taken to Caiaphas's home, where he was probably beaten and kept in a cistern overnight, and then sent to Pontius Pilate the next day.
This diagram is a diagram of Caiaphas's house, and you can see the section marked A is the pit that Jesus, or the cistern that Jesus was put into overnight, waiting for him to be taken to Pilate the next day. We'll show you some pictures here of the pit from above. They had a couple portals that you could look down into to see what the pit looked like. Nancy and most of our contingent actually went down. They had a stairway down into, so you could actually go into the cistern itself.
Oh, this is the heading toward the western wall, or the weeping wall. Here, the men and women are separated and pray at different parts of the wall.
This is just a picture of the board that gave you some rules and regulations and information about what you were going to see. The western wall is actually divided here. You can see to the far right, looks like a curtain. The next picture shows you a little bit better. On the upper part of this picture is the men's side, or the left side of the wall. And on the right side of the wall is the ladies' side. So men and ladies could not go together, just like Jewish tradition, the men and women don't worship in the same room. While I was walking down to go to the wall, I happened to look next to me, and there was Chuck Gatica and his pastor. So I struck up a conversation with them, and lo and behold, they allowed us to get together with them and have a picture taken. So what you see is Steve Uper, Chuck's pastor, Chuck Gatica, Terry Uper, and myself. And then we bumped into them a couple other times during the next 2 days. This is a picture of just the Upers together.
They used to write their prayers on a little piece of paper and go up to the cracks in the wall and stick those into those cracks while they prayed. And they prayed back and forth, up and down, back and forth, up and down, saying whatever mantra they were saying. And now we are going to see the Western, these are the teaching steps by the Hulda Gate. And the rabbis used to teach during the day. And we took advantage to sit down and rest. A lot of walking.
Yeah, and you can see that that particular gate here is blocked off or closed. You can see sort of the arches, the 3 arches there. And here's a better picture of our tour guide. He was extremely educated and knowledgeable. He had several degrees and was just a great guy and full of information. And then my favorite picture, we have our Kentucky Fried Chicken. They have their Arab fried chicken. Okay.
We saw that as we passed by in the bus.
Oh, yeah. Yes. This picture here, diagram, is of the old city of Jerusalem. And it shows you the different sections. It was broken up into 4 sections: the Christian section, the Armenian section, Jewish, and then the Muslim. And they were, like I said, there were 8 major gates around this. So based on where you were coming from or where you were going, you might go to a different gate. For instance, if you were going to Jaffa, you would go to the Jaffa gate. If you were wanting to take your waste out and throw your waste in the dump, basically, which is just outside the city wall, you went in and out of the dung gate. Appropriate name. Like I said, there were 8 primary gates to begin with.
Okay, this is our last day of touring. Now we went through the old city of Jerusalem.
This is just showing you the signage, showing where the Herod's Gate was, if you were trying to go there. And again, you can see these buildings are very old, very rustic. The streets and pathways that we walked, very narrow. In this case, this one had an uphill climb to it, and one side was flat, basically for carts, pulling carts and things, because it's hard to pull a cart up a set of steps. And then there are steps for people on the other side. Well, we've seen cars go up and down these things with no room for people to walk. Here's a picture of the Lion's Gate. You can see the lions on each side of the archway. A couple pictures of the city streets. And the city streets were full of stores and little shops on both sides. You could buy everything from food, medicines, you name it, that was there for sale. Of course, all kinds of gift type items as well, and souvenirs. This was a car that came down through while we were walking this little walk or street, and we kind of had to smash ourselves against the wall so it could get through without running over our feet.
Okay, then our last day of touring, This is the Church of St. Anne, which is the beginning of the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of the Cross. And it's in the Muslim quarter of the city. So we didn't get to do much other than we got to go in there and sing, because it's known for its acoustics. So they let us come in and sing a song, but that's about all. The tradition is that this is the site of Jesus' maternal grandparents, Anne and Joachim, and the birthplace of Mary, the mother of Jesus. It's, as I said, it was known for its acoustics, and we went in and sang some songs in the church. There are caves that lead down to the crypt of the remains of Anne and Joachim, and an altar dedicated to the birth of Mary.
Right.
We walked the Via Dolorosa, the Way of the Cross. The station number 5 is where Simon the Cyrene, which means he was from Libya, was made to carry the cross.
The number 5 you can see right to the left top of the doorway there. We actually got pictures of almost all of the Way of the Cross doorways or markers, but just decided to show you one or two.
This is the eye of the needle. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into heaven. That's Matthew 19. In the time of Jesus, after dark, all the gates were closed. Travelers or merchants wanting to enter or exit the city would have to go through these smaller doors within the larger doors, with camels on its knees and the baggage removed. Not what I thought of when I read go through the eye of a needle.
Right. This particular was a good example of it, but each of the gates would have had something similar to this. A large door with a smaller door within it.
Now we're going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that's located in the Christian quarter of the city. It's also known as the Church of the Resurrection. The control of the church is held by several different denominations: the Greek Orthodox, Armenian Apostolic, Roman Catholic, and other less-known denominations. It's very ornate.
Right. Give you an idea of some of the stuff. There's just so much of it was ornate like this. We went into the different areas. This happened to be the Catholic area that we took a picture of. And you can see all the gold work and the silver, flowers and the drawings and pictures. It's just beautiful. They had these murals on the wall depicting Christ's crucifixion and burial. Just very detailed and very large. You can get an idea by, you can see Terry Uper's head, I think that's Terry there, how large this mural is on the wall.
Now, the Protestants prefer the Garden Tomb as the site of the resurrection. The Garden Tomb was owned by Joseph of Arimathea, who, with Nicodemus, was given permission by Pilate to take Jesus' body from the cross and be made ready for burial. Now, Golgotha, which in Aramaic is the place of the skull, and in Latin is Calvary, would have been outside the walled city at the time.
You can see here, just a little left of center, the two holes there. Those are the eyes of the skull. Now, this picture was taken about 1950, maybe a little earlier than that. And it already had significant erosion. The pictures we took show a lot of erosion. On this picture to the right, just above the buses, is the eye that you saw in the other pictures.
We think of Jesus being crucified on a hill, but Romans would have crucified him along the road in order to put fear in all the people.
Right. This is a diagram of the tomb, and if you look at number 4, the top 4, the top of the picture, the 4, would have been where Jesus was laid. This particular tomb was set for 2 occupants. And number 6 is the weeping area, where people would have come in to pray and weep, and where they finished preparing the body to put him in the tomb. The tomb door itself, part of the wall was broken into, so they have reconstructed and closed it down to limit the number of people that could go in and out at a time. And you can see Nancy's head in the picture there. A little better picture showing you the entryway. We did see, and I didn't get a picture of it, sorry, but right in front of the wall here was sort of like a gutter, a little bit of a gutter, like maybe a 12, 15-inch gutter like, which was a channel to use to roll the stone in front of the tomb or to roll it away. The stone itself had disappeared years and years ago, so they had a mock of a stone like it to the side, but I didn't take a picture of that. The tomb itself, what you see on the left side would have been where Jesus would lay. When you look back at or think back at the diagram that I showed you here, legend and our Bible scripture says that one of the disciples, I'm not sure if it was John or Peter, looked in and they could see that Jesus was gone. So they know that, and for him to look in through the doorway to see if Jesus was in there or not, he had to be in the upper number 4 position. He couldn't have been in the lower 4 because he would not have been able to see him from the doorway. Okay. Okay. Again, a picture of the tomb from a distance showing Tom and Susan Clippert. At this point, after all of our group had a chance to get in and see the tomb, we met in an area that was reserved for our group, and Steve Uper led us in a communion service where we had a chance to just absorb the surroundings. The garden is beautiful, and it just brought you back to real life.
And then from here, the bus picked us up and took us to the airport for another overnight plane ride. Well, I did want to mention that on the first night that we were in Jerusalem, we attended a discussion between a Palestinian Christian and a Jewish government official. The Palestinians spoke of the loss of their land and their homes after the Six-Day War in 1967. They left their homes due to the war, but when the war was over, when they returned to their homes, they found them occupied by the Jews. The Palestinian Christian population is shrinking, partly due to these circumstances and the fear of further war. Both men spoke of a lack of a peace treaty, each blaming the other party. The Jewish official said that Israel did not start the Six-Day War or any wars, but responded in kind. He said that the Jews over the centuries have been thrown out and lost their homes, and that these were the spoils of war. Now, we have over 600 pictures. We tried to pick those that represent the highlights of our trip. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for joining us at home. And thank you to Nancy and to Jim for sharing with us. And thank you to Keith Meadows for running our AV so that this could also be live streamed for those that felt more comfortable to see it at home. So thank you for coming, and I hope you have a great night.